Welcome back to the channel, my friends. Warhammer Man Studios. I'm Warhammer Man, and today we're taking a look at the brand new Warhammer 40,000 Metawatch. This video is sponsored by CMO Games. More on that later. So absolutely no changes to Chaos Demons. Absolutely no changes to Chaos Knights. So Chaos Space Marines got quite a few changes, mostly internal balance stuff. We see like Terminators going down. It's interesting, we actually see the Chaos Vindicator going down, Cultist going down. Overall, just lots of cuts for stuff that's not being used. All right, and then for the Dark Angels, we know there has been a lot of crying about the Dark Angels and just how terrible their book is. But now with the updated points, I already thought it was a pretty good book, and they were one of the best Space Marine factions. And now I think they may be actually the best. Blood Angels have been doing really well. Black Templars have been doing really well. But honestly, I think Azrael is arguably the best character for Space Marines, or at least one of them, with a guaranteed +1 command point per turn. And I think Dark Angels are actually very, very viable right now, even with the changes to the Iron Storm detachment, which was the best detachment in my opinion to run them in. So that being said, the Deathwing Knights went down from 235 to 215. So now they are a very reliable tank at 215. Deathwing Terminators down to 180, so now 5 points more than a regular Terminator squad that also went down. We see the Inner Circle Companions at 90 and 180, the same price as Blade Guard Veterans. So now you can run a Librarian with them and have the invulnerable save that they were missing, or you could run them with Azrael and also get that invulnerable save. They're still lacking a little bit in the AP department, but have some other really cool benefits, specifically if you run them with something that's going to give them an invulnerable. All right, next we see the Lion. So the Lion actually had some pretty good rules, and depending on what faction you were running him in, could be viable, but was definitely a little bit overcosted. He went down from 350 to 300. So I do expect to see the Lion on the table now. He is by far the cheapest Primarch. Guilliman at 350, and then some of the other Chaos Primarchs like Magnus up at like 440. So massive, massive decrease on the Lion. And even though the actual Dark Angels detachments aren't particularly amazing or necessarily the best, I fully expect people to be running the standard Space Marine detachments with Dark Angels now way more. And they should be competitive at this point. So we saw Hellbrutes get trimmed across the board. So Death Guard, that was the only change. Hellbrute came down by 10 points. Absolutely no changes to Deathwatch again. Very surprising, as they are by far the worst performing faction statistically. But I'm also biased because I play Deathwatch. Drukhari, no new changes. It looks like overall they did a good job with them with the new detachment and then also all the points decreases last time. Some decent points cuts for the Genestealer cults, mostly for stuff that's not getting used. So Aberrants came down by 5 points per 5. The Ridge Runner came down by 10 points from 85 to 75. Goliath Rock Grinder down by 25 points. Goliath Truck down by 20 points. Most of those units weren't really getting used, Aberrants sometimes. So I don't think this is going to be a massive change, much more of an internal balance. All right, next is Grey Knights. So the Brother Librarian went up again by 10 points to 120. The Brother Tech Marine went up by 10 points to 70, rightfully so. And then the Nemesis Dread Knight, just the standard one, went up by 10 points. And then we saw cuts to the Inceptors, Purgation, Purifier, and Strike Squads. So again, much more of like an internal balance, like spam issue than anything. Imperial Knights got a ton of points reductions in the last data slate, so no changes here. Leagues of Photon just getting a 10-point cut to the Warriors. And then also Uthar the Destined getting a 10-point cut. All right, and then Necrons seeing some legitimate changes. So we don't see any rules changes, obviously, with this Munitorum Field Manual, but the points changes should make a big difference to the Necrons. So worth note that we see the Catan Shard of the Deceiver not changing in points. We see the Shard of the Nightbringer going up by 40 points to 295. We see the Shard of the Void Dragon going up by 20. We see the Shard of the Void Dragon going up by 20 points to 290. And then we see the Chronomancer going up by 15 points to 65. The Monolith has went up by 25 points to 375. And the Transcendent Catan has went up by 10 points to 285. We see Illuminator Caesarius went up by 15 to 175. Immortals have went up 5 points per 5. The Plasmancer has went up by 10 points. The Technomancer has went up by 25 points. And then the Hypercrypt Legion Dimensional Overseer has went up by 15 points to 25. And then we see some other cuts into some of the other units. But realistically, this is a massive nerf to the Hypercrypt Legion and like the Catan or Monolith kind of like immortal spam list. So this should make a huge difference to Necrons. This should bring them much more in line. And honestly, looking at this right here, I think this will put Necrons in a much more balanced place. But if you are a Necron player, if you were running one of these like spam competitive lists, you're probably losing an entire unit, maybe two. Now a quick message from today's sponsor. CMO Games has been selling Games Workshop products online for over 20 years. They carry the full line of Games Workshop products, including Warhammer 40,000, Age of Sigmar, Necromunda, Blood Bowl, paint tools, and more. Almost all Games Workshop products are priced at 15% off MSRP. CMO Games takes pre-orders for most Games Workshop products released at their earliest date possible. 12:01 a.m. on Saturday, they go live. Most of these pre-order products are also priced at 15% off MSRP. CMO Games offer free shipping in the US 48 with an order of $50 or more. Their customer service is top-notch and they ship most orders within 24 hours. Visit CMOGames.com using the affiliate link in the description and let them know that you heard about CMO Games from Warhammer Man. Now back to the video. All right, next we've got the Orcs. So again, it looks like there's a ton of changes right here, a ton of stuff in green, but realistically, it's because this is going off of the new codex points. So it's green if it changed from the points printed in the codex, not from the last Munitorum Field Manual. So it looks like they got a bunch of decreases, but in all reality, most of the stuff is still the same. And because the book has just come out, we'll have to see what needs actually adjusting after a couple of months. All right, and then we have Space Marines. So overall, in a pretty good spot here. They're not doing particularly amazing, but I think they're right in the middle of the pack where they should be. So very minimal changes here, but interesting ones. Assault Intercessors went down by 5 points per 5, which I think they were in a really good place. I'm not mad about that because they are very strong. Brutalis Dreadnought went down by 15 points to 160, so I think it's a much more viable option right now. And then Eliminator Squads went up from 75 to 85 points, so up by 10 points. So definitely some interesting changes, but the one that actually shocked me is Hellblasters. Hellblasters went down by 10 points. So it was 125 per 5, they went down to 115, or 250 for 10, and it went down to 230. So Hellblasters were already very good, and we're seeing quite a few of them on the table, especially in like a Gladius detachment, but I think they're even more viable than ever now, and we're probably going to see more of them. And then Incursors went down by 5 points from 85 to 80, probably not going to make much of a difference. All right, and then we have seen quite a bit of Stormraven spam recently in some various detachments. So the Stormraven went up 20 points from 240 to 260, rightfully so. Terminators overall have just gone down in points, so down from 185 to 175, making them, again, just much more viable. And then we saw the Vindicator go down in points by 15 as well. And then the final change is the Ironstorm Spearhead. So we saw the Ironstorm Spearhead has been one of the strongest detachments, and I wasn't sure if they were going to change Tech Marines to try to balance that out, but instead they actually just did a couple of the enhancements. So we see the Adept of the Omnissiah went up by 10 points to 35. And we see the Master of the Machine War God went up by 10 points to 30. So still very good enhancements. Overall, if you're playing an Ironstorm Space Marine army, realistically, your army probably just went up by like 20 points, unless you were doing that plus spamming Storm Ravens, in which case you could have gone up by as much as like 60 to 80 points. But overall, not too many changes to Space Marines and still in a good spot. Space Wolves saw a couple of minimal changes to their Scouts and Terminators going down. The Tau Empire have no actual changes on this Munitorum Field Manual, but we know they're about to get updated points as soon as the Codex is released, and they did specifically say on day 1. All right, and then Thousand Suns have been performing quite well in the index. So the main changes are the Arcane Vortex has went up by 10 points to 25, and the Lord of Forbidden Lore has gone up by 10 points to 35. So most Thousand Suns army will have gone up by 20 points right there, and then quite a few other units getting cuts. So realistically, maybe a little tweak or two, but no changes to the Thousand Suns. All right, and then Tyranids, we saw an increase once again in Gargoyles, so they went up by 5 points per 10, and then we see quite a few other cuts on some of the less popular units. Most notably, Zoanthropes going down by 10 per 3, Tyranid Warriors going down by 10 per 3 and 5 per 3 with the ranged weapons, and then the Swarm Lord coming down from 270 to 240. All right, and then World Eaters getting some interesting tweaks, all points reductions, Terminators coming down by a couple points, Mauler Fiend, and Hellbrute coming down as well. But most notably, Jackals and Khorne Berserkers getting a cut. So Jackals coming down by 5 per 10, so it's now 65 points for 10 Jackals. And then Berserkers coming down by 10 per 5, so 90 points for 5 Berserkers. So sort of reopening back up that Jackal spam potentially. All right, so that is it for the Munitorum Field Manual, just sort of like points overview. I think the biggest changes obviously coming to the Necrons, and then also a nice little boost for the AdMech. And again, with the exception of AdMech coming up a little bit and Necrons coming back down to where they probably should be, the majority of this is going to be more of an internal balance thing. And hopefully we'll see more balanced armies and more viable options amongst all the factions, rather than too many factions getting like lifted up or pushed down, aside from those main outliers. So let me know what you guys think down below. Always like to hear back from you in the comments. I think Dark Angel's also going to be legitimately viable at this point in time. And Ironstorm's still going to be a very, very nice option for Space Marines. As always, special thanks to CMO Games for sponsoring the channel. Check out the link in the description to save 15% on Games Workshop products. That's it for today. Warhammer Man Studios, I'm Warhammer Man, and I think they did a pretty good job. And I'm out of here.